Each time I walk down to my basement, I tell myself it's just another room. But every time, the smell of old wood and iron dust pulls me right back to 1962, the year I buried my childhood behind those walls. Hello, my dear friends, I say softly to the camera. It's your old grandma, Martha Ellison, talking to you again from my little house here in Boulder, Colorado. You can probably hear the clock ticking behind me. That's my favorite sound when I tell stories. It keeps time moving while I go back to the places I thought I'd left behind. I ask everyone watching to like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where they're from. Morning coffee people, night listeners, all of you. Because today's story isn't about my garden or my photo albums. It's about the secret film that changed everything in my family, the one I found again after 60 years. I was born in Maple Hollow, Kansas in 1949. It wasn't much of a town, just a post office, a gas pump, and a handful of tired wooden houses lining a dusty road. Ours stood at the edge of the cornfields. The wind there never rested. It rattled the windows and carried whispers through the walls. My father, Harold Ellison, worked at the railway depot, fixing engines and loading cargo. My mother, Grace, was a quiet woman who could mend anything, clothes, shoes, broken toys, except maybe the people she loved. I was the eldest of two. My sister Lydia came 5 years after me. She was all freckles and questions. I was the opposite, cautious, always watching. The first camera I ever touched wasn't mine. It belonged to my uncle, a Korean War veteran who spent his days wandering with his 8mm Kodak, filming clouds and trains. When he visited, he'd let me hold it, heavy, metallic, warm from the sun. The world looks different when you frame it, he told me. Through a lens, you see the truth that hides in plain sight. I didn't understand back then. Later, I would. Our home looked perfect from the outside. My father's laughter could fill the street when neighbors were around. But when the doors closed, so did his smile. The man who once sang with us by the piano turned into someone else, silent, impatient, with a bottle instead of a tune. It began after the accident at the depot. A steel pipe snapped, shattered his ribs. He survived, but something in him didn't. After that, we learned to read silence the way other kids read books. One wrong word at dinner could start a storm. If the soup was cold, he'd throw the plate. If the radio was too loud, he'd smash it. Mother's voice would tremble when she said, "He's tired, Martha, just tired." But I knew it wasn't fatigue. It was something darker growing behind his eyes. When I turned 12, he stopped going to church. He said God had forgotten him. Mom prayed twice as hard, maybe hoping God would notice the rest of us. Then came the first night I saw him stumble home past midnight, shirt stained with oil and whiskey. He slammed the door so hard the glass cracked. Lydia started crying. Mom told me, "Take her to bed, sweetheart." But I didn't sleep. From my room, I could hear them arguing, low at first, then loud. Then a sound like a chair falling, and after that, only her muffled sobs. The next morning, her cheek was swollen, and she smiled through it. "I slipped," she said. That was the first lie I caught her in. There would be many more. Life continued in that strange rhythm, long, quiet days and nights filled with fear. At school, I acted normal. I smiled when teachers asked about my family. I even won a drawing contest. But each time the bell rang, my stomach twisted at the thought of going home. It was during that year that I got my first real camera, a gift from my uncle before he moved to Texas. "Keep this, kiddo," he said. One day it might save you more than you know. It was an old Brownie 8mm, scratched but still working. I didn't know it yet, but that camera would soon become my only weapon. Mother's health started fading. The doctor said she needed rest, maybe a heart specialist in Wichita. We couldn't afford that. She spent more and more time lying on the couch, hands on her chest, whispering prayers. I began taking care of Lydia, cooking, cleaning, doing homework at the kitchen table after midnight. And Father, well, he stopped talking altogether, except for orders and curses. One Friday night, he came home drunk earlier than usual. I was in the kitchen washing dishes when I heard his boots in the hallway. "Martha," he called. Something in his voice made the hair on my neck stand up. When I turned, he was standing in the doorway, swaying, holding his belt like a whip. "You think you're too grown to listen now?" That night, the plates shattered before I even had time to scream. I won't tell the details, not yet, but that was the night fear turned into something sharper. The next morning, I went to the backyard with the Brownie camera. I looked through the tiny square of glass, framing the old fence, the sky, the cornfields beyond. For the first time, I felt control. Through that lens, I decided what stayed and what disappeared. That day, I made a vow, a silent one, whispered to the wind. If the truth kills him, then so be it, but I'll never let him bury it again. I didn't touch the camera for a week. The bruises on my arm turned yellow, then gray. Mother avoided my eyes. Lydia asked too many questions I couldn't answer. Everything in that house smelled like fear and dust. One night Father came home earlier than usual, too quiet, too sober. That was worse than his drinking. He sat at the table, staring at me while eating cold beans from the can. Then he said, almost calm, "You think I don't see the way you look at me?" I froze. He smiled, a slow, crooked thing that didn't reach his eyes. I knew then I had to act soon. The next day, when he left for work, I went to the attic and found Uncle's old tripod. It was rusted, but solid. I set it in my room behind a stack of boxes. The camera faced the door. My plan was simple. When night came and he came for me, I'd turn the light low, pretend to sleep, and record everything. I practiced turning the knob silently, testing how much sound the shutter made. It was soft, barely a click. I'd have one chance. The film was short, only 3 minutes, but 3 minutes could change everything. That evening the air was thick with thunder. Mother was in bed again, too weak to cook. Lydia slept beside her. I sat on my bed pretending to read, waiting for his boots on the porch. They came at 11, sharp, slow, heavy. He entered smelling of rain and whiskey. "Still awake?" he asked. I didn't move. He walked closer, humming a song I hadn't heard since I was a child. The hairs on my arms rose. He sat on the edge of my bed. His hand reached out. I pressed the record switch. The tiny motor buzzed beneath the blanket, barely audible. I focused on breathing evenly, pretending to sleep. His hand froze midway, then continued. I kept my eyes shut and counted. 1, 2, 3. The camera blinked its red light once before dying. The film was done. He never noticed. When he left, I stayed still till the house went silent. Then I hid the camera under the floorboard near the wall vent. My fingers shook, but I smiled for the first time in months. Next morning, he acted as if nothing happened. Mother asked him to bring medicine from town. He grunted and left. When he was gone, I pulled the camera out, wrapped it in a towel, and ran to the old water tower behind the field. I buried it there between 2 stones and marked the spot with a rusted tin can. Days later, the news came that Mother had collapsed again. This time, she didn't wake up. She died on a Wednesday morning while Father was at work. The doctor said heart failure. I knew better. Fear kills slowly, just like him. At the funeral, he cried in front of everyone. The neighbors said, "Poor man, losing his wife so young." I stood beside Lydia, holding her hand so tight it hurt. My father's tears meant nothing to me. They were just another act for the crowd. That night, I went to the field, dug out the camera, and whispered, "Now it's just you and me." The film inside held proof, not just of what he'd done to me, but of who he really was. I didn't know how yet, but I'd make the world see it. After the funeral, the house felt hollow. The walls echoed with things unsaid. Lydia spent most of her time at the neighbors. I didn't blame her. Father quit his job, said the world didn't deserve his work. He drank from sunrise till night, wandering between the porch and the kitchen like a ghost who'd lost purpose. I kept my head down, cleaned, cooked, pretended life was fine. But every time his shadow crossed the hallway, my stomach turned to stone. One afternoon, I went back to the field to check the camera. The tin marker was gone. Someone had been there. My heart hammered. I dug with my bare hands till the dirt broke my nails. The camera was still there, but the case was cracked open and empty. The film was gone. That night, I heard him whistling in the living room, a sound I hadn't heard since before Mom got sick. He was sitting in his chair, spinning something small between his fingers. The roll of film. "Looking for this?" he asked without looking up. My throat dried out. He laughed, low and cold. "You thought you could trap me, just like your mother tried. You're both the same. Ungrateful." He tossed the film into the fireplace. The plastic curled, melting fast. I wanted to scream but didn't. He watched me, smirking. "That's what happens when you cross me." When he went to bed, I waited till his snores filled the house. Then I took the poker from the fireplace, stirred through the ashes. The reel was ruined, but I found the metal core intact, enough to know I could do it again, better next time. I cleaned the camera with shaking hands, loaded a new roll stolen from the pharmacy. I wouldn't let him erase me. A week later, he sold Mom's sewing machine for liquor. I started washing clothes for Mrs. Henderson down the street to buy food. Lydia asked when we'd leave. I said, "Soon." I didn't know how, but soon. Then one night he came home, bleeding, split knuckles, broken bottle in his hand. He slammed the door so hard the window cracked. "You think you can live here without me?" he shouted. I didn't answer. He grabbed my wrist. I didn't flinch this time. "Hit me again," I whispered. He froze, confused. That hesitation was all I needed. I shoved him back. He stumbled, hit the doorframe, and cursed. "You're your mother's daughter," he hissed before staggering outside into the rain. He didn't come back for 2 days. When he did, he was calmer, too calm. He brought flowers, placed them on the table, and said, "Let's start over." I smiled just enough to keep him guessing. Behind my back, the camera was rolling again. This time, I didn't plan to hide the film in dirt. I planned to make sure it was seen by someone who couldn't pretend it wasn't real. I didn't know who yet. A neighbor, a teacher, the sheriff. Maybe anyone who'd listen. But I knew one thing. The next time the camera blinked, it wouldn't be just my secret. It would be his ending. I carried the camera like a secret in my apron pocket, heart hammering against the metal. Tom at the photo shop had looked at me the way people look at small fires, curious and careful. I paid him with coin I'd earned washing for Mrs. Henderson. He promised to develop the strip after hours. "No one will see," he said. His voice was steady enough that for a moment I believed it might all be simple. 3 nights later, he handed me a narrow envelope in the dark alley behind his shop. "Don't open it here," he whispered. "Take it where you feel safe." I walked under the street lamp, the paper damp from the rain. My hands moved fast. Inside were frames, stills seized from the night. My father looming over me, his hand on my shoulder, the shape of menace in the half-light. There was the look he wore when he planned to scare us into silence. There was the angle where he thought no one watched. I didn't gasp. I folded the photos into my palm and breathed like someone surfacing from deep water. Proof is a strange thing. It changes the air around you. It gives weight to a whisper. I had options, and none of them were easy. I could go to the sheriff, but in Maple Hollow, men like my father counted on old loyalties. I could show a neighbor, but rumors travel faster than truth and could endanger Lydia. I could bury the film again and keep living under the same roof with the same shadows. Instead, I chose the middle road. I needed a witness who understood images, someone who knew how to hold evidence and not flinch. Tom agreed to meet my plan. He was younger than me, lived with his mother, wore his hair too long, and had a quiet face people trusted. He told me about an aunt in Wichita who once helped in a case. He didn't ask why. He just said, "We'll make copies. We'll keep one safe." That night, I set the camera where it had never been before, sitting on the parlor table with the lens peeking from under a doily, as if to record dust. I told Lydia to sleep at Mrs. Henderson's again, gave her a lie about picking berries in the morning. When Father came home, he was a storm in boots. He sniffed the air like an animal that had found a new scent. "Who gave you that camera?" he barked. "No one," I said. "Uncle left it to me." He scoffed and reached for it. I blocked his hand. He slapped the table. The little glass beads from Mom's centerpiece scattered like spilled teeth. His face was a low red moon. I left the room as if to fetch water. I walked to the side door, then back, palms sweating. When he followed, I turned and stood close enough that he could smell the soap on me. I held the photograph envelope in my fist behind my back. "People talk," he said. "They always talk." I stepped forward and laid a single print on the table where he could see it without moving. The image showed him in a light his neighbors never witnessed, the other half of the man they praised at church. His grin turned brittle. He reached and slashed the picture with his thumb, as if destroying ink could erase the moment. "You think that will hurt me?" he snarled. His hand found my wrist, hard. Pain bit through, sharp and hot. I did not pull away. I pulled my hand free, faster than he expected. He staggered, lost his balance on the ragged floorboard. The lamp tipped. Time narrowed to breath and thud. When he lunged, it was not with the strength of a man ready to tame a child, but with the raw fury of someone cornered. I moved on instinct. The poker by the fireplace felt heavier than it looked. I struck once, not to watch him die, but to stop the reach of his hand. He collapsed against the table edge and hit his head. The room tilted with the sound. I did not watch the blood. I watched the clock. For a long second, he lay still. Then he coughed, a raw sound, and I knew I had to act before mercy became my enemy. I grabbed the envelope, the camera, Tom's copy, tucked in my apron, and called for Mrs. Henderson, as if stumbling, as if the world had turned wrong. "Help," I managed, voice thin. She burst in, eyes wide. A neighbor might have called the sheriff if I'd wanted a quick ending, but I needed time. Time for the ambulance, time to put the story in order. I told Mrs. Henderson to fetch her phone and not to open the door. When the patrol arrived, I left the facts unadorned. My father attacked me. I defended myself. The photos sat on the table like a small, loud jury. The officer's face was unreadable. He took the envelope, handled the frames with a professional care I hadn't seen in any neighbor's hands. He called for an ambulance. While we waited, Father moaned, then shifted, and then, as if waking from a bad dream, opened his eyes and looked at me. There was no plea there, only a strange, small anger that avoided shame and landed on something colder. "You'll regret this," he whispered. "People like that speak threats like weather warnings." I folded my hands, palms flat on the table, and let the world decide. My throat felt like it had been scaled and smoothed. I had taken a step that could not be undone. I had chosen light over silence. The ambulance came with its small blue light like an accusation. The men lifted him carefully. I watched him go, watched the last of my childhood lie on the stretcher. I held the photos until Tom arrived and took them away to duplicate and hide. He promised to bring copies to Dr. Lane in Wichita if anything went wrong, a name he'd gotten from his aunt. And then he left, closing my door behind him like a vow. That night the house was quieter, but not because fear had left. It was because a new sound had arrived. People moving, shoes on floors, voices discussing things that now had names. I sat in the dark and thought of the camera in my pocket. It had blinked, recorded, and now it had given me more than proof. It had given me a way out. I told Lydia in the simplest way I could that we were not to be ashamed of the pictures. "We used them," I said. "We used them to make him stop." Her eyes were full of questions that would take years to answer. For now, she curled beside me and slept like a child who had finally learned to breathe again. Outside, the rain washed the road clean. Inside, I dried my hands and wondered which part of the world would break first, the law, the town's loyalty, or the habit of pretending everything was fine. I knew only one thing for sure. Once the truth stepped into light, pretending became harder. They said the trial would be quick. It wasn't. Nothing about that summer moved quickly except the gossip. The whole town wanted to see the Ellison girl who'd raised a poker to her own father. People whispered outside the courthouse like crows over fresh corn. The first morning, I wore Mom's old dress, pressed flat at the collar. Lydia sat with Mrs. Henderson, small and pale beside her. My hands wouldn't stop shaking till I saw Tom in the crowd. He nodded once. It meant, "You're not alone." The judge was an older man with gray eyebrows that met in the middle. He asked questions slow and formal. The lawyer the state gave me told me to speak plain, just tell what happened. I did. No tears, no drama. I said what he did, how long it lasted, how I'd tried to get help, how the camera caught what no one wanted to see. Some faces turned away. Some didn't blink. Father sat across the room, bandage over his temple, arms folded like stone. When they showed the photos, he didn't move, not even when the sheriff said these were found at the scene. He only smiled once when his lawyer called me confused and emotional. The word emotional hung in the air like smoke. Then came Tom's turn. He brought the duplicates, the signed note from Dr. Lane confirming authenticity. "These aren't stories," Tom said. "They're frames of truth." The judge looked at him a long time, then at me, then back at Father. The room went so quiet I could hear the rain start outside. During recess, a woman I didn't know pressed my hand in the hallway. She whispered, "You did what many can't." I didn't feel brave. I felt emptied out. By the third day, the verdict was ready. Guilty, assault, corruption of a minor, attempted coercion, 12 years in prison. The sound in my ears wasn't applause, just my own heartbeat. Lydia burst into tears. Mrs. Henderson hugged her. Tom's mother crossed herself. Father didn't look at anyone when they took him away. Afterward, the sheriff walked me outside. He said, "You changed something today, Miss Ellison." I wanted to believe him, but all I could think was how small the world still was, how the sky over Maple Hollow hadn't grown any bigger, just because the truth was spoken. That night, I packed a single bag, the Brownie camera, the photos, the diary Mom kept hidden behind the flour tin. Lydia and I moved into Mrs. Henderson's spare room. The house smelled of soap and bread, not whiskey. I slept without flinching at every sound. A week later, a letter came from Wichita. A woman from a shelter wrote that they could take us in, help with school, with work. I said yes. We left at dawn, carrying only what fit in the back seat. Tom waved from the edge of town. "You'll come back?" he shouted. I nodded, though I didn't know if I would. The road stretched straight and endless. The fields blurred gold in the morning sun. Lydia slept on my shoulder. I looked at the camera resting on my lap and thought of everything it had seen. Evidence, proof, justice. It was more than that. It was the line between the girl I'd been and the woman I was becoming. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what the light might reveal. I rolled down the window and let the wind take the smell of our old life away. Wichita was louder than any place I'd ever known. Cars, voices, train whistles, everything moved faster, as if time itself refused to wait for anyone. The shelter stood on a corner between a bakery and a church, paint peeling but clean inside. The women there smiled without asking questions. They called me Miss Ellison, not that girl from Maple Hollow. That alone felt like air after drowning. I got work folding laundry at a motel. The smell of detergent stayed in my hair for months. I saved every dollar, shared a small room with Lydia. She started school again, quiet at first, then louder each week. She made a friend named Claire who wore bright ribbons and talked without fear. I used to watch them from the window, thinking how strange it was to see laughter near us again. Tom wrote once a month. His letters were short. How his mother missed me, how the shop was doing, how the town had stopped whispering about the trial. He never said my father's name. I never asked. After 6 months, the shelter director, Mrs. Baker, introduced me to a photographer named Henry Maddox. He needed an assistant to organize negatives and carry equipment. "You've got good hands," he said. "Careful ones." It was the first kind thing a man had said to me without expecting something in return. The studio smelled of chemicals and dreams. The first day, I watched him develop film under red light, the images appearing like ghosts finding their faces. I felt something stir inside, a memory of the Brownie camera, of the night the lens blinked. Henry taught me about exposure, contrast, how light could tell truth or lie, depending on who held it. Within a year, I was shooting portraits, families, babies, young couples. My pictures weren't perfect, but people liked them. They said I made them look honest. Henry said honesty was the hardest thing to capture. When I turned 18, I rented a small apartment above a florist shop. I hung my first prints on the wall, sunsets, street corners, rivers after rain. They weren't about pain, they were about starting again. Lydia visited every weekend, still carrying her school books, still laughing with that friend Claire. I cooked soup and told her stories that ended well on purpose. One evening after work, I found a letter without a return address. It said my father had been transferred to another prison upstate. No explanation, no request. I folded the paper and threw it away, unopened. I'd spent enough years reading his shadows. I wasn't giving him another line of my story. Weeks later, Henry invited me to an exhibition downtown. "Bring your camera," he said. I did. I took photographs of the crowd, faces lit by flashbulbs, laughter, champagne bubbles, frozen midair. For the first time, the click of a shutter didn't mean fear. It meant life moving forward. When I got home that night, I found another letter, this time from Tom. He was moving to Wichita to work in a printing shop. "If you ever need help with your photos," he wrote, "I'll be there." I read it twice, then tucked it into the drawer beside my negatives. Years passed like snapshots, quick, bright, fragile. Henry retired and gave me his old Rolleiflex. "You've got an eye for truth," he said. "Don't waste it." I didn't. By 20, I had my own sign. Ellison Photography, Weddings and Memories. People smiled when they walked in. They didn't see the past in my hands. They saw a woman who'd built something from nothing. Sometimes, late at night, I'd still hear echoes of the old house, the door slamming, the voice that once ruled every breath. But then, the morning light would slide through the blinds, and I'd remember that chapter was over. I'd survived it, framed it, and moved on. Now, my camera didn't hide secrets. It captured beginnings. 10 years later, my studio was filled with laughter instead of silence. Clients came and went, carrying their stories in boxes of prints. I married Tom in a small ceremony behind the shop. No flowers, just sunlight and a borrowed radio. He never spoke of the past, never asked what nightmares still lived under my ribs. He simply held the ladder while I hung photos and said, "You made this place real." That was enough. We bought a house near the edge of town, a narrow one-story with peeling paint and a porch swing that creaked in the wind. Lydia visited every Sunday. She'd become a teacher, sharp-eyed and gentle. She brought her students' drawings to show me, smiling like she'd invented color itself. The world felt possible again. Then one morning, a letter arrived from the Department of Corrections. My father was being released early for good behavior. I read the words twice, then burned the paper in the sink. Tom watched the ashes curl and didn't speak. For days, I waited for a knock that never came. Each night I checked the locks twice, kept the phone near the bed, but nothing happened. He simply vanished from my story. Instead of fear, what came next was anger, not the kind that burns everything, but the slow kind that sharpens you. I poured it into my work. Photography became more than a job. It was the language I spoke best. I began a series called The Unseen, portraits of women who'd survived what no one wanted to discuss. They stood against simple backdrops, no makeup, no poses, just truth in its raw form. The exhibition opened in 1978. People came, cried, applauded. Some whispered it was too heavy. I didn't care. The truth should weigh something. Afterward, a woman approached me. She said my photos made her tell her husband to leave before he killed her. She hugged me hard and whispered, "You saved me." That moment rewrote every memory of pain I'd ever had. The lens that once caught horror now captured rescue. Years slipped by. Tom and I moved west to Colorado when he found work at a newspaper. We opened a smaller studio, mostly landscapes and local stories. Mountains replaced fields. Snow replaced dust. I aged slowly, like film developing under soft light. Lydia passed away, young, a heart condition like our mother's. I photographed her classroom empty, chalk still on the board. That photo became part of the unseen collection, a tribute to quiet heroes no one remembers. When digital cameras arrived, I bought one, reluctant at first, but I learned, as I always had, to adapt. The tools changed, but the eye remained the same, searching for truth through light. Now, at 73, I still wake before sunrise. I sit on the porch with coffee and wait for the first gold on the mountains. My granddaughter sends me messages about her photography course. I tell her, take pictures that mean something, everything else fades. Sometimes new viewers of my channel ask why I tell stories like this, why I bring up the past when life looks so peaceful. I tell them peace isn't given. It's built one frame at a time. I built mine with a camera, a truth, and the courage to press the shutter when the world turned away. So if you're listening tonight, press like, subscribe, and write the word light in the comments. That's what we all need, a little more light and the will to keep it shining.